Good morning. So we come to Monday morning at on Iona and the Village Hall, and I'm going to hand over very soon to Victoria, who is on my right, and to Anna, who is also in the room. Before I do, a few practical announcements, and the first is to introduce Wendy. Wendy Lloyd is one of our communications managers. The other is Leanne Cleland, who'll be arriving on Wednesday. So by the end of this week, if you're here for the whole week, you'll have met our communications team. We are so lucky and so delighted that Wendy and Leanne have joined us. Patience and Michael, there are seats at the back. The other person I want to introduce you to is Iona Kinnett. You want to stand and say hello? Iona is a staff member with the Wild Goose Publications team. So Iona will answer any questions about Wild Goose Publications, and if she can't answer them, she'll graciously pass them on. Iona's here till Wednesday, yeah, and is staying in the MacLeod Centre, but we'll be eating in the Abbey. So if you're staying elsewhere, grab Iona at these sessions. There's going to be a break for coffee and tea, and there's a coffee and tea team with Tracy who have set up the coffee and tea. And we're going to carry on though from now until 12:30. If you're staying at the Abbey, you'll have heard this morning, you do need to get back to the Abbey to pick up your lunch at around about 1:45. Out in the entrance hall on the window ledge, there are some cards. You won't be able to read this from a distance, but you can come and read this later. The cards are to Kathy Galloway, whose birthday it was. I think it was a significant birthday the other day. Yvonne Moreland, Jane Rogers, Jean Belgrove, and Peter Miller. So that's just to let you know that there's only single names on the cards, but if you want to know which Jean, it's that Jean. And there's space, if you want to name other people for whom cards should be sent, let me know, I have more cards. Fiona, would we have the pilgrimage sign-ups? Do you have them? So out by the cards, there is the pilgrimage sign up. Can you, if you're staying, particularly if you're staying elsewhere on the island and you want to go either on the long off-road pilgrimage or the on-road pilgrimage, could you sign up this morning? Because we need to close the lists today, really. And I'm hoping that the Abbey folk who want to sign up have already signed up. They're right there. I'll come back to Travel Pool. There is a sign-up sheet, I think also out there, for the open mic concert. Do we have Liz here yet? She's coming down. You are gonna not want to miss this. I've bigged it up, Scott. I hope she's all right. Come, if you only just come to be part of Liz's team for the evening. It's going to be a great concert, but please sign up. There's a sign up sheet out there. If you've got 6 poems, choose one. If you've got 5 songs, choose one, choose the best. And maybe 3 to 4 minutes maximum for your act. And if you're in any doubt, please practice it and time it, because it's going to be a great concert. Just a few other things. Most of this is on your program. So you should all have a program. So don't worry about writing it all down. It should be there. It's just to remind you, tonight, there's a session in the MacLeod Centre community room where I'll be opening a conversation about the MacLeod Centre vision. You've all received the paper. Molly and Shamara, there's seats at the back. Can I welcome Shamara here, another one of our speakers? Welcome. These guys will be on later in the week. So tonight at 7:30, if you want to be part of a group conversation about the MacLeod Centre questions, then come at 7:30. Otherwise, you know what you need to do. I've asked you all to send back to me your reflections on the MacLeod Centre vision by the 10th of September. And there's 3 very specific questions, and that's really, those are the questions I would like you to answer. In the MAC, another incentive to go, the quilt which we talked about yesterday in the Abbey Church is hanging, it will be hanging in the MAC, is hanging in the MAC, and it'll be there till Wednesday evening. And there are little descriptors written by each of the quilt square design team about why about the sign of hope that square represents. So take your time to look at that. And on Tuesday evening, this isn't your program, the new members will be in the MAC leading a session about who they are, and that will include the quilt. If anyone still needs a wristband to get into the Abbey, make your own wristband with the coloured wool and the scissors on the stage here. There are 2 author events. One is today at 5 o'clock. And it's the whole team of the authors of Young, Woke and Christian. So they'll all be in the Abbey today at 5. And then on Wednesday at 5, it's going to be Martin Rowe. Do you want to wave, Martin? Something about Julian and tea bags and poetry. There'll be more on Wednesday. And a final reminder for me is that and again, it's in your program, but there'll be a session on Wednesday evening in the MacLeod Centre, led by Victoria, who's doing a PhD on the Iona community and the mission element of the Iona. Well, you can say more about your research, but I'm going to slide gently into introducing Victoria. And first, though, I want to say a huge welcome to everybody who's with us on the live stream. So we have Wendy here helping with the technicalities, setting it all up. And we have, I think, Fidge and Isabel on the team virtually, and a number of other people. Do we know how many people have joined us?
Yeah, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people. We've
Can you hear Fidge's voice?
Australia.
Okay, so we've got 15 people, which is just amazing.
We've got Helen in Australia, Calhoun's in Texas, Rolf in Germany, and everybody else in
Germany, Texas, Australia. Okay, we'll keep that going. And it's just, you maybe have an idea how much work has gone into every single bit of cabling and every single bit of technicality. It has been a labor of love. Don't touch anything. When we go into small groups, there are 2 rooms, one here and one over there, for those who prefer to be in a room with a single small group in it. So please just make sure that you take yourself to either one of these 2 rooms. Dot, did you want to say a word about these things on the...
I'm Dot from the Mull and Iona family group. While some of us are signing up for pilgrimages tomorrow, a man called Sam from Carseg on Mull has signed up to run a mountainous, monstrous ultra marathon to raise funds for the Mull and Iona Ranger Service, which does fantastic work around these islands, but is always in a precarious funding situation. So he's going to run 35 miles up all the peaks of Mull that rise above 2,000 feet. So it's an ascent of 17,000 feet up and down 12 mountains, equivalent to running well over halfway up Mount Everest. So if anybody feels inspired and wants to donate, I've put the Just Giving link on there, and that would be much appreciated. And if you're not signing up for either of those things, just to let you know, there is also a Syrian lunch event in the hall tomorrow.
Thank you, Dot. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anna, who's going to be leading our session after the break. And Anna has been amongst us since Friday, so it's great to have you here, Anna. But first, Victoria Turner. Victoria is going to be introducing the book, Young, Woke and Christian. I have my copy here. Do you want to be saying about this? Or do you want me to? I think you just heard this morning that, what did you hear? It's gone into a reprint today. So keep buying. I don't know how often that happens with books, but I mean, for a book, it's fairly a little bit niche, but it's just fantastic that it is so popular. We're not surprised. We are honored to have 6 of the authors of Young, Woke and Christian in our midst, 4 of them in the room today and 2 on our staff team, Annie and Jack. And over the course of this week, we'll be hearing and going deep with them. And I've said to them, give us your story and ask us bold questions. So we look forward to your stories and your bold questions. I think in Victoria Turner, you will find somebody who knows probably more about the Iona community than any of us sitting in here. If any of you have had a conversation with Victoria, it is slightly surreal. She almost knows more about us before we open our mouths. And it is a wonderful gift to know that somebody is tending and listening and caring and reflecting in the ways that you are, Victoria. So over to you.
Sorry, that's my book. Your book's that. Sorry. Thank you. it's not even my book. I forgot to bring my book. I stayed with a friend in Edinburgh, and it's even got a lovely note telling him how much I love him and his wife. And I was like, can I just take it for a week? Sorry. Good morning. It's so lovely to be here. Thank you so much. It's a bit surreal having studied you for a few years and feeling a bit like a spy to now be at your mess and in your warm arms. Yes, Young Woken Christian has nothing to do with my PhD, really. It was lockdown. I was getting a bit bored. And I was getting very frustrated with the rhetoric about young people, and that the real word here is about young people. I felt like we had such a voicelessness in larger society and in the church. And so really on a whim, I sent off a proposal to SEM Press and kind of thought, well, my dream would be to write a book called Young, Woke and Christian that kind of talks about how young people aren't outside of the church. We are Christians, we are part of the church, and that our political views and our passions actually are what Jesus has taught us to do. And it's integral to the mission of the church. So it's kind of related to my PhD, but kind of not. My supervisor doesn't think it is. Poor Brian. So that was the whole idea. And yeah, it's happened. And we're about to be reprinted. We're going to speak at Greenbelt, and it's very exciting. Well, we think so. Others, however, sometimes have mixed opinions. Funny. We had our first review was someone who wrote a review on their own blog. And part of it says, well, the end. Well, maybe we'll start at the end. Unfortunately, I can't recommend this book at all. The helpful chapters, Marsh, Idahem, Thwaites, and Fletcher, well done, Shamara, are outnumbered by the ones that really didn't do anything new, true, or beautiful, in my view. Yeah, this person did not like the book. They kind of went through the chapters and realized that they didn't see themselves in it, that it was a bit new and it was a bit different and it was a bit scary, and they weren't able to embrace it, and said some kind of hard things. So many hard things about, well, there is no in-betweenness in gender, there's male and female. They said some things like, well, the Christian Union, like where's that in this book? So yeah, that was quite hard to read. That was the first one that came out. And Anthony Reggie, actually, who wrote the prologue and has been a wonderful friend, just emailed me and said, Victoria, when you read book reviews, just remember they're writing about themselves. That was really helpful. Recently, we had another one come out that said, well, I expected this book to tell me how to make every church into a Holy Trinity Brompton, and it hasn't. And I thought, why did you think that? But we've also had some really, really beautiful ones. And my favorite ones are from people who kind of titled their reviews, Old, Woke and Christian. And they say, I love this energy, but I promise you it's not new. And we're very much like, no, it's not new. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be with the Iona community today, who from my research I've seen has been trailblazing the way for radical, loving Christian witness in the world. Yeah. So I've kind of explained a little bit about why this book, but I thought I would give a little bit of my experience of being a young person and being a Christian, because actually it's really tricky. It can be really tricky in the UK to say you are a Christian. I found when I went to the University of Bristol for my undergraduate, I'd studied religion and theology. This is when the Common Awards just started to come out. So we severed kind of links with the Baptist College and Trinity College. So I mostly did religious studies. So my undergrad dissertation was about Christianity and mental health and the relationship between them for young people. And my supervisor was wonderful, but she was a Buddhist scholar. So I felt a little bit out in the way. Kind of most people on the course weren't Christian. And so most of my friends came from kickboxing and taekwondo. And in these kind of spheres, it's quite strange to start talking about Jesus. But I found, interestingly, when we got drunk, they wanted to talk about God so much. And kind of when you say like, oh, I'm a Christian, people come up with these amazing conversations they want to have with you. And it's really beautiful. But I didn't just come out confidently and say, I'm a Christian. I'd always say, oh, yeah, I'm a Christian, but. And then the but would say, but I like gay people. But I think colonialism was wrong. And kind of all of these kind of claims. And then I kind of realized by the time I went through all of the ways of the Christian that I'm not, there wasn't that much space to explain like why I am a Christian. Or maybe I didn't even think about why I am a Christian at that point. It was just kind of an identity that I had that didn't really mean too much. So I grew up in a 5-denominational ecumenical partnership in Cardiff, which was great. It's a product of a great ecumenical energy, but because this church had already united, they very much saw themselves as like in a silo. The work had been done. So they didn't need to engage with their context. They didn't need to engage with other churches. They didn't need to engage, and they called them sponsoring denominations. And I hate that word. I hate it. A denomination is not your sponsor. A denomination is your family. But that's the kind of the way that the church functioned. So it was a very palatable middle class kind of Christianity in a working class area, very removed. So I was in a bit of a strange place with my faith, maybe. Things like URC Youth Assembly, that was great. That was a rejuvenation, being with lots of other young people. And I've been really lucky to work a lot with the Council for World Mission, Churches Together in England, and experience Christianity in different ways from other young people. And I think that rejuvenated my faith, but I wasn't really sure how that related to my everyday faith. But then going to Edinburgh, I decided I wanted to study world Christianity. I want to think about ecumenism. I want to think about interfaith. I want to think about political theology. And I started reading liberation theology. And I was like, this is it. This is it. This is why I'm a Christian. I get it. And just everything fell into place. And at some point, I realized I love being a Christian because I love justice and I love Jesus. And that's what he was about. And the creativity, I think, liberation theology gave to my faith, and the confidence it gave me to strive for justice and to strive for a better world. And for me, the thing I grasp onto with what I think the church should be doing is giving the world hope. I think that's the most prophetic voice that we have, that the world is so hopeless and so dark and so stuck. But Jesus didn't do that at all. He shared stories, he connected with people, he went out of his way. And I thought maybe this energy that I feel, the passion that I feel for my faith, the church needs to hear that. But I was doing a PhD, so I was like, no way can I write that book all on my own. So I thought, well, who could I get to do it with me? And that was the easiest part. Finding all of these contributors was magnificent. So I kind of came up with themes that I thought would be important, like human sexuality, transgender theology, interfaith relations, mental health, food poverty, homelessness, like sexuality and liberation. These kind of themes came out, so I wrote them down. And then I thought, well, who would fit this? And finding people was maybe from my church networks that already exist, maybe from Twitter. If you ever want to hear a young person's voice, just go on Twitter. We're really there. All of these places kind of brought them together. And I didn't actually ask the contributors before I took the book proposal to the publisher, because I was like, oh, they're probably not going to accept it, are they? I mean, SEM Press probably aren't going to accept it. I think they should, because they've come from the student Christian movement. This is what they should be doing. They probably won't do it. But they said yes. And then I was panicking because I was like, oh, I haven't actually asked the contributors if they want to do it. Oh no, now I have to write a book and I don't have any friends. But it went really well. But even there was a bit of a struggle that I think speaks to what it is to be a young person in the space of the church. So at first, the publisher was really enthusiastic. I already had Anthony Reddy on board, who is a really famous Black liberation theologian now. I knew him before he was famous. Bless him. But the publisher said, well, actually, we had a board meeting. And we're not sure, Victoria, that you, being a first-time author, and all of these other young people, most of them being first-time authors, can do this on your own. So maybe you can ask Anthony Reddy to be a co-editor with you. I thought, well, okay, doesn't really make much sense, but fine. Sent that off to Anthony Reddy, like, hello, would you do this with me? And he said, absolutely not. This man was very angry. In no way am I a young person, he said. This is your idea, he said. You do not need me to hold your hand. Thank you, Anthony. I went back to the publisher. Hello, David. I'm doing a PhD. I think I can do this book. Anthony thinks I can do this book. He's going to write the prologue. Will you take it on? And okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we got there. We got the book. Recently, there was a tweet came out about it, and the thing that the publisher said was, we took a bit of a risk with this book, but it was one of the best things we've done. And I'm thinking, why is it a risk to let young people speak to the church? I don't know. So, thinking about woke. When people ask me, why did you use the word woke? Partly because I wanted to sell books. Yay! Mostly because I'm just so frustrated with how the word woke has been demonized. I went back to the history and I thought, well, where can I find the origins of this term? And I went to Angela Davis, who is a Black feminist theologian. Oh, she's not a theologian, actually. Well, maybe she is. More like a sociologist, historian. She's everything. She's great. Read her stuff. And one of her first books was Women, Race, and Class. And she talks about in the south of the United States at the time of segregation, the colored women, they were called colored women, they call themselves that, started like little groups, like feminist groups, but their aim wasn't really themselves. Their aim was to stop slavery. So these were free women and they wanted to stop slavery and they wanted to stop racism. And they talked about in like the 1860s, they talked about how the way that they navigated the world was quite different. That because they were both women and because they were Black, they weren't able to just live in the world freely, but they always had to have this kind of enlightened consciousness to be very aware of their vulnerabilities. Okay, it's the first one. We get to South African apartheid. Alan Bozak in 1976 writes his PhD thesis on Black consciousness. And he talks about how to be Black in South Africa is to always see yourself as less than white. And he was really inspired by James Baldwin, James Cone, and he thought, how does this work in an African context? And talked about what does it mean to be a Black enlightened African? And he talks about Black consciousness, kind of the same vein. Then we get to Black Lives Matter, 2004 first, with the idea of woke comes out. It's like, and in reggae music is there as well, this idea that you have to navigate the world differently because of your vulnerabilities, because you have to expect to be discriminated against, because the world is not made for you. And I just look at that legacy and I think, oh, that's beautiful and heartbreaking and beautiful. And how dare we strip away that legacy and ridicule it? How dare we ridicule the plight towards justice and equality? But then on the other hand, I'm a white person. I don't have to be woke, right? I can live in the world with my white privilege, collecting my money, being very normal. So why did I feel like I needed to use a label? And I felt like I needed to use label because the media and the public dismiss lots of views from young people as woke to silence them. So we actually had a Zoom conversation together and we thought, well, how can we use this word woke without trying to take the word for ourselves? We didn't want to say like, we're young woke people, we have everything right. Absolutely not. We also have things to learn. That's why we do conversations, right? Dialogue, so important. But we wanted to use the word woke to kind of say, well, what you're arguing against, what you think you need to silence, actually is this. And maybe it's not that scary, and maybe it's not that revolutionary, but maybe it's what the Bible is teaching us to do. So that was the idea. If you're going to put the label on us, okay, fine, we'll use it. But let's have it as it was. Let's keep the beauty of it. Let's respect the legacy of it and have some humility towards being woke. So I'd always say I would strive to be woke. I want to be in solidarity with those who have to be woke, but I'm always just going to be trying. I'm never gonna have this enlightened consciousness, right? So this brings us to discussion groups. When we think about woke in this book, the kind of chapters, I'll read out the themes of the chapters. So we've got mine coming out as Christian, being in the world and being a Christian and having to navigate that and people's connotations of that. And I was actually in the story on my way to Oban, to Iona, with my friend Zara. And I was explaining the idea of the book. And she said, oh, it sounds like coming out. And I was like, oh, I'm really glad you said that, because I've been thinking that, but I don't know what coming out's like. But that was great. And that was in the forefront of my mind that, oh, yeah, to be a Christian and a young person, you have to come out as Christian. You start a friendship and then you're, oh, by the way, I'm a Christian. Please still be my friend. It's tricky. We had Liz Marsh, who's also doing their PhD at Edinburgh. And her title's called Climate Crisis, Grief, Anger and Hope as I Look to the Future. And I drew a little bit about this in the sermon yesterday, about how dare we not have hope when people are sinking. Really beautiful. Nossa Idahan is from the Baptist Church, and her chapter is Radical Inclusion, Guidelines to be in a More Racially Inclusive Church. And there's been a lot published about racism recently, but what I loved about Nossa's chapter was how positive she was. And there's so many guidelines of how you can do it well. And she's got so many of her own stories of how she's become a leader in the church just by someone mentoring her and somebody seeing her gifts. A really nice one. Josh Mock, Queer, Christian and Tired, Why I'm No Longer Talking to Cis-het Christians About Sexuality. That's the fiery one. I love it. Josh just very much talks about, like, we've got queer theology. We've done the work. Like, why are we still in the churches? Like, let's protest. Let's go back to the 60s. Let's disrupt. How dare our identities be questioned anymore? And we've got Molly's, who talks about when did I start calling my body it? Purity culture, trauming, and learning to embody liberation. We're going to hear from Molly on Thursday. Kirsty Borthwick. Her title is Comfortable Feminism is Not Enough, Following Christ's Call for Abundant Life. And Kirsty's situated in the Church of England, so she talks about the issues where people can still deny a woman being a minister in the Church of England, but also taking a very global idea because she spent some time in Bose with the World Council of Churches. Jack, trans and Christian, really beautifully simple chapter. He wrote as if he was talking to a friend who's trans and doesn't feel like they belong to the church. It's a really nice one. Anna described it as a calm wave in a storm. I think that's also how Jack's personality is too. Chrissy Thwaites. Chrissy is Church of England, and hers is waking up to ableism in Christian communities. So she didn't want to use the word disability, but ableism, and kind of turn that on its head. We have Anna, Food Poverty, Bread of Life or Bread for Life, and she'll be up next. Annika Matthews. Annika's coming this evening, and hers is the relevance of mental health for the faith of young people. Annika's going to be speaking with Shamara tomorrow. Shamara's is the intentional integration of homelessness and formerly homeless communities radically transforms the life of our church. And Shamara's got a brilliant term, which is unlikely leader, that will, I'm sure, inspire all of us. I use it all the time. And Sophie Mitchell, interfaith engagement as social action, going beyond sharing samosas to realizing a common humanity. And since that, I've had many conversations with people, publishers, SEM Press especially, that they don't want to publish anything on interfaith anymore because it's not selling. Apparently people just aren't concerned with interfaith. And I just find that shocking because I think young people are really concerned about interfaith because we've grown up in a context where interfaith happens every day. Our friends in school have to be of other faiths, and we have to think about these hard questions. And especially my undergrad, I did a lot of theology of religion. So thinking about like, what is our God the same God as a Muslim God? Does it matter that my friend reads the Quran and I read the New Testament? I just think like the big questions academia is going away from, and they're really trying to make it an experts topic, that you have to be an expert on the other religion to start thinking about it. And I think that's a big mistake. I think these philosophical, these big questions about how to be good neighbors are really important. And finally, our lovely Annie, her chapter is Our Call to Real Peace, which is just a beautiful way to finish the book. So, what are the concerns of the Iona community? Historically, what do you know have been the concerns of the Iona community? And does that make the Iona community woke? Please have 10 minutes. 10 minutes. So the next thing I want to talk about is this, my other trigger word in the title, missing generation. Who came up with the idea of the missing generation? What does that mean? Are we missing? And in many ways, numerically, I have to speak slow. Numerically, in churches, there is a lack of young people on a Sunday. Absolutely. Does that mean that young people are not Christians? I don't think so. Steve Aesop has done an amazing book. He's Scottish. Many people are nodding their heads. Good. Called The Invisible Church. And at the end, he has a quote from a young person. And it says, I thought the role of the church was to spread the gospel, but I think it fossilizes it instead. And so Dave Walker, who's a wonderful cartoonist, he put this in the Church Times, the magazine, and I saw it and I said, Dave, please let me put this in my book. He's like, of course. As I just think it's brilliant. You know, women must be treated equally. A parish can still choose to not have a woman as its vicar. You should be able to marry your boyfriend. Same-sex couples cannot marry in a Church of England church. We need urgent action on the climate crisis. The church's investment bodies have a 2050 net zero target. So bad. Shit. It's the same as the government recommendations, and the church needs to be more prophetic. Yeah. Oh, maybe it changed. Sorry. Good. Let's not get sidetracked into this conversation. Fantastic. Maybe it's better than the cartoon says. I hope it is. I felt, though, coming from the United Reformed Church, we have a great mechanism to allow young people to speak to our General Assembly. So in the URC, there are 26 seats for young people to go to the General Assembly. We have exactly the same speaking rights, and we have exactly the same rights to vote. So we vote on any motion, and we can bring motions and resolutions to our assembly. Talking to other young people from other denominations, I've realized how special that is. Church of Scotland doesn't have a youth gathering anymore. They've got some youth representatives, but they're not allowed to vote. The Anglican Church in England, no longer has a youth gathering. They have some council reps, but at the moment, without a gathering, they're not sure how the reps can be represented on synod. The Methodist Church, they've got an excellent, massive youth gathering, 3 generates. The young people, only 3 are represented on the National Synod. So I just saw this massive gap. And I thought, well, where can young people speak into the church? And actually, is this word missing generation fair? Because I think what it does is it puts the blame on young people. Because if they're the missing generation, there's no voice that has to speak to the church. Because we're outside, because we've chosen to be outside, because of this liquid modernity kind of idea, where all young people are fickle and we don't care about anything, so we can't be trusted. I had a conversation with somebody who was really excited to join their local church in membership and be baptized. But the church turned around and said, well, you're going to go to university in a few years, so we'd have to pay to the main church to keep you here, and you're not going to give us any money, so wait till you come back from university. And things like that, I just think, make me really mad. And there's a lot of youth work studies about young people that kind of talk about how we're addicted to our phones, how we're products of capitalism, products of consumerism, etc., etc., etc. And I just got to the point where I'm so bored about being studied for the church. Well, if we study young people, if we can understand Generation Z, then we can produce the right poster, the right kind of alpha course. Alpha course might work for some people, not for many other people. And then they'll come to church, and then they can sit here and we can ignore them. I mean, this isn't also just in the church. Like, I've just got some examples of the media. Millionaire tells millennials, if you want a house, stop buying avocado toast. Happiness among young people has a 13-year low. Do you remember in COVID when the University of Manchester actually locked students into the accommodation, even though the government told them to go to university and told them to live with 5 strangers with 1 bathroom in a moldy student halls? Yeah, the living wage, young people aren't paid. Apprenticeship wage, I think it's still like £4 or £5 an hour. The student loans, this idea of education. I'm from a working class background. No way could I have afforded could have afforded to fund myself a theology degree. Yeah. So where do I go for hope? I go to Bonhoeffer. And the least read of Bonhoeffer's work is his 8 Theses on Youth Work, which he published around between 1931 and 1933. So I'm just going to read some of these out. The spirit of youth is not the Holy Spirit. The future of the church is not youth itself, but rather Lord Jesus Christ alone. It is the task of youth not to reshape the church, but rather to listen to the word of God. It is the task of the church not to capture the youth, but to teach and proclaim the word of God. So originally I found this quite tricky, and I was like, well, Bonhoeffer, what are you saying? But then I realized, with the help of Keith Clements and Andrew Root, that he's talking about the issue with things like the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Movement, the Student Christian Movement, and how they can often be separate from the life of the church. And Bonhoeffer's trying to say that YMCAs and SCMs and what they do is brilliant, but there's no point if the church isn't listening to them, that it constantly needs to be an intergenerational conversation. So he's saying that young people deserve to be in the church because they are the church, because the church is the community. And so to carve them out a special role that you have to be radical, you have to think this, you have to do that, actually puts a lot of pressure. And it should just be because we're there, we're part of the conversation. But often we enter churches, we're given loads of stuff to do. Annika talks about this a lot. You go in, oh, can you do this reading? Can you do the coffees? Are you okay? Can we do? You can't just be. And then very often you get, well, why don't you bring a friend to church next week? Why do other young people not come to church? I can't answer for my generation. I don't know why many other people don't come to church. I do know. I'm trying to explain it here, but I can't really tell you that over coffee in a nice church service. And I just think that's a massive problem, that I think a lot of the time when we go into church, we're not just one of you. It's not celebrated that we're just a person in the church. There's always a token. Oh, but there's a young person here. Oh, this young person, can you serve communion? Let's put this young person on a stage so we can show people that we're not all really old. And it's just, how can we organically integrate, and how can we organically love and be a community and be an intergenerational oneness? So just to finish, just some questions to dwell over, I guess. Like, what might we need to let go of the church? What part of the church might need a fresh vision that we can all do together? What struggles are we highlighting the church has? How do we start this intergenerational conversation? And what are our core values for continuing Christ's church and mission in our world? Good, and that's the last part. I think we'll have a couple of minutes for questions before Anna comes for her big question. Okay, great. So you had your groups thinking about wokeness. These questions here, I would just like to invite you to talk to the group if you'd like, and online as well. And Anna's got a roving mic that she can come and bring.
Any testing? Any questions? We've only got time for about 3 questions. If you've got a question, be quick.
I'm John. I'm from West Midlands Family Group. I don't want to be put in the place of defending the Anglican Church, but the Church of England has voted in Synod to go to zero net carbon by 2030. And I want you to know that and not make a mistake. And the church commissioners actually lead the nation in ethical investment. They are used as a model for ethical investment by many other organizations. And I think that's something that we should be really proud of in Church of England, whether you like it or not, but these are facts.
Two things, one to follow. I'm Alison from the Bristol Family Group. I used to sit on the Ethical Investment Advisory Committee of the Methodist Church. They work with the church's investors group, and the churches are actually together, not just the Anglicans, way ahead of everybody in ethical investment. I'm not saying we're perfect, but that is a big thing that we're doing. But the other point I wanted to make, just as me, is I don't think of young people as the missing generation. I think of the missing generation as being the generation below mine, the 40-somethings. So, you know, I don't think that young people are missing. I just wish we could connect with them better, but it seems to me that it's the sort of 40, 50-somethings at the moment who are missing and didn't have that sort of passion that you and the other writers of this book have.
I know we're not supposed to be directly responding to each other. We're supposed to be responding to you, but I'm Diana Carroll, and I'm part of the Yorkshire 3 family group. And I am now a second-year new member as of yesterday. And I'm 40, and I'm officially the youngest person in the new member program right now. I don't know about the next group coming in, the next cohort, but there's a bunch of us in our 40s and 50s in that group. And I don't think we're the missing generation either. I think I would agree with every word that you said about young was exactly my experience as a young person in my 20s and 30s. And the same exact thing is true for me as well. So just to respond to that sense of, I don't want to be labeled as the missing generation either for all the reasons that Victoria said.
Okay, great. Coffee time. Thank you. I just want to clarify, missing generation is an academic phrase, an academic idea that's talking about our generation. It's not me saying we're missing. The whole point of the book was me arguing we're not missing, we're here, listen to us. And the environmental concerns, that's great. URC is divested from all fossil fuels already. The cartoon wasn't done by me. It was obviously done a few years ago now. This was published in 2022. I don't know, not even that long, but things change. So I'm glad that there's movement. As young people, I think we'd say 2030 is still not good enough.
So to just slightly change track, you've all just had an amazing conversation about whether Iona is woke. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering what woke means. Check page 3 of the book for a definition if you need. And to lead into what I'll be talking about in a bit, I just wanted to give you something to mull over during your 15-minute break. to chat to each other, and we will have time to feed everything back at the end of my session. My session is very much so linked with, is Iona woke? So that conversation is coming round, so continue those conversations in the small groups. But I just want you to think about these two pieces of scripture. So one is Matthew 6 verses 25 to 27, and one is Deuteronomy chapter 15 verse 4. And I want to know, what does it mean? What are the practical implications of this scripture? What should our actions and response be to the scripture? So we'll have a chance to chat about this and to chat about Iona. But yeah, just something to think about during your coffee break. So we'll see you all in 15 minutes.
Just to say thank you, Victoria. We take a risk if we do not listen to one another, and if we do not listen to the authors of this book. So we are here in the listening mode. Thank you so much for the introduction. We will now have the coffee, but don't forget the sign-up sheets and the cards. Hello, live stream friends. It's very nice to see or know that you're all there. And we're going to hand over to Anna. So that was our first session. We're going to have this delightful interaction with these authors for the rest of our time together. Our role is to listen really carefully, to conjure up questions, to ask, to be, I guess, a little bit, self-reflective as a community. What is this telling us? Exactly as Victoria has teed up so beautifully this morning. So let's continue in that mode, listening, considering what is this saying to us? What are Victoria and Anna and Shamara and Molly and Annika and Annie and Jack, what are they saying to us now for today? And it might surprise us, and it might be a little bit uncomfortable. Let's hope it is. And let's store up our reflections and ask ourselves, what now do we need to do and say? So without further ado, and we're going to keep you moving fairly swiftly. You're going to have to do coffee a little bit, save up your chat for the walk back. It's going to be, there's lots of time. And we're going to hand over to Anna.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm looking at my phone because I'm always got notes on my phone, and I'm always on my phone because I'm always taking notes on my phone. So when you see me around, please don't think me rude. It's just constant stream of consciousness. So I'm interested to get some of your thoughts on this, but I thought first, I've not had a chance to talk to you all yet, so I should just spend 2 minutes introducing myself. I'm Anna Twomlow. I wrote this chapter for Victoria's wonderful idea of a book called Food Poverty, Bread of Life or Bread for Life. I'm by no means an expert to talk on any of this, and being in the community the last few days, I've realized just how many people here are experts in so many things, and I'm here just as much to learn from you as you are to learn from me. So please answer my questions just as much. Everyone who's spoken to me will know that I ask a lot of questions. And I'm leaving on Wednesday afternoon because I've got tickets to go and see ABBA. Be jealous. But they're not dead, first of all. Firstly, secondly, it's holograms of ABBA. But I booked the tickets 1.5 years ago, and I really wished I'd booked them for next week, but it is what it is. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you all and get to know you all. So please do just pull me aside. I'll be on the pilgrimage tomorrow. Apparently it's a long walk, lots of times for chats. And Molly and Victoria are just handing out some post-it notes and pens. If you've not got one yet, it will come. You will use them. So I'm Anna. I grew up in Zimbabwe, where I lived till I was 15. My dad moved to Zimbabwe after independence to work with smallholder farmers who had been given the worst land by the colonial government, and he wanted to help. Then when I was 15, I moved to Kenya with my family, where I went to high school, where my dad worked for the UN, again with smallholder farmers, but on a more global level. I then went to university in Durham to study geography, because I just fascinated by the beauty of creation and wanted to learn more about it, but was also aware that we as humans are a bit crap and ruin it sometimes, so wanted to learn more about that.
And then I went to Edinburgh, where I fell in love with beautiful Scotland, and lived there for a year and studied science communication and public engagement, because I was aware that there's lots of knowledge, but people don't know how to talk about it a lot of the time. So I wanted to learn a bit about that. I then went on to live in Italy and Spain, and I moved back to Zimbabwe and did all sorts of random jobs. And the job that actually led to me being asked to write this chapter by Victoria was I worked for the UN World Food Programme for a year, which is a humanitarian organization working in areas of extreme poverty and extreme famine, and was working in food systems there. And then I started a PhD, which was rubbish, so I left it. And sometimes quitting is very brave. And that was to do with natural hazards. And now I work in climate change research. And up until Friday, I was working in researching sustainable behavior. So for example, does getting a smart meter actually reduce your greenhouse gas reductions? And if it does, how do you get people to get a smart meter? But on Friday, I got a new job. So I will be working to help businesses reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, because policy is amazing, but it doesn't move fast enough. So businesses, unfortunately, have to create a lot of change so that we as consumers can change. And I think there's a role for the church and community there, which is that government doesn't move fast enough, and we should be moving a bit faster in these things. So yeah, I'd love to talk with all of you about that. I'm an 8th generation Methodist. I've had a bit of a fallout with the Methodist church. I'm a bit of a failing Methodist, as I'm sure everyone in this room has had fallouts with their church at various times, because we all seem to be a bit heave-ho, a bit rebellious. But I love the Methodist church. It's very important to me, but I went to Catholic school. I was a member of I am a member of the community of St. Anselm, which is at Lambeth Palace. And it's a contemplative community based on Ignatian, Benedictine, and Franciscan spirituality. I was training to be a local preacher with the Methodist Church. I worked in an ecumenical surf house in Lanzarote for a few months, which was great. So I'm just a bit of everything and would love to talk to you all about it more. But first, I want to hear from you. I've probably only got time to hear from about 3 of you, but does anyone have any reflections on what these pieces of scripture mean and what the practical implications of them might be?
Just a quick one. I really, yeah, it's Alison Salisbury from Thames Valley Family Group. I always have an issue with when it says among you, because in many churches, including ours, people seem to assume that means among us as a congregation, or us as a church, or us as Christians, and among us doesn't mean among the world.
And it should. That was the off-piste piece there. Anyone else have any reflections on these pieces of scripture? I'll tell you what they actually mean in a minute, but my interpretation's the right one, obviously.
Neville from the East Anglia Family Group. A hopeless rural Anglican retired clergyman. Find myself in churches where they can't live in the moment. They still live with their traditions, and their traditions are weighing them down and helping them die. I don't know if anyone else recognizes that from established church worship, and it's such a shame. Living in the moment allows you to live and to grow and to go on.
Got time for one more.
Mike Miniter, Edinburgh South. Is this working? Yeah. The first one actually makes me feel quite uncomfortable, because on the way here, I was thinking about the song, how did it go? He has the whole world in his hands. And I thought we actually need to rewrite that. He's put the whole world in our hands. And there needs to be a balance with faith, so have to be a little bit careful on that. But when we look at climate and when we look at environmental crises, then the notion that we don't worry is so far from my mentality at the moment.
Yeah, so all of these are obviously correct, but I was using these in a very literal way when I was writing my chapter. And I think Jesus was very literally just chatting with his mates. And I think he was just saying we should be able to depend on others to have our needs met. Creation is sufficient, we know that. In the last, I would say 70 years, Liz, who is a very much so an academic who knows a lot about this, might have more details than me. But in the last 70 years, pretty much all famines have been man-made. Obviously, they are often in response to natural disaster, but there is enough. Creation is sufficient. We just need to share it justly. And I'm really always so convicted by the early church, you know, those people who knew Jesus and then went on to found these beautiful communities who took that really, really seriously. They truly believed it should be a place of shared material wealth, and they truly believed that everyone's needs should be met. It was non-negotiable to them. And so for me, that means that statistics like this are an embarrassment to me. Poverty and hunger have been steadily increasing globally for 10 years. One quarter, that is nearly 3 billion people of all the humans on this planet are affected by severe or moderate food insecurity. And in the UK, 8% to 10% of households struggle to make ends meet. They struggle to eat. And this is obviously more than just statistics. This is stories. This is the stories of millions of people who have been condemned. They've been condemned by us to lives of insufficiency. They've been condemned by the systems that we uphold and the systems that we benefit from to lives of insecurity and insufficiency. And it really, oh God, it gets me. And I'm sure all of you are having similar thoughts to the way it makes me feel right now. And one of my favorite quotes is somewhat dubiously attributed to the French poet Charles Baudelaire, and it's: the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing us he doesn't exist. And in the same vein, I would argue that the greatest trick that the greedy, powerful, and corrupt ever pulled is convincing us that the plight of the poor has improved. Because it's not. It looks different, but it's still rubbish. And I grew up, as I said, in Africa, so I saw a lot of rural poverty, but urban poverty and rural poverty are completely different. And I personally struggle with urban poverty because it's so obvious how much there is for these people. And it's so obvious how much they shouldn't be living like that. Whereas in the rural poverty situation that I've seen in Africa, that stark contrast isn't there as much. Both are awful, both are rubbish. But for me personally, when I see it in urban and developed contexts, it drives it home a lot more. And the truth is that the poor are the marginalized, and it's the people who face all of these other injustices, which every single one of you care about, who are at the greatest risk of suffering from food poverty. It's a systemic issue. It's directly linked with all of these injustices. You know, you have these amazing, is it called COCs in Iona? CCNs, community networks. You have these amazing ideas and things that you care about, and food poverty directly links with all of these. You know, food poverty is exacerbated by race, by gender, by class, by disability, by sexuality, by socioeconomic status. All of these injustices exacerbate food poverty. And charity isn't enough. You know, the church, we've historically engaged in treating the symptoms of food poverty. Oh, we love a food bank. We'll have a food drive. Oh, doesn't that make you feel good? Oh, bit of soup to the poor. Oh, brilliant. And that's really important. Oh my goodness, it's so important, but it's not the end goal. It's a step towards justice. It's a step towards sufficiency for all. And if you're only engaging in treating the symptoms and not the causes, you're just prolonging the same cycle again and again and again. And I think it's very clear that Jesus didn't think that we should be doing that. He thought we should be working to justice and sufficiency for all and just sharing. And in the UK between 2016 and 2020, so this is before the pandemic even began, food bank use was increasing by about 16% per year. It's ridiculous. And people of color in the UK, and specifically Black British people, are twice as likely to experience food insecurity than white British people. So all of these things are just so linked, you know, it's this web. And again, I know all of you are so clever and so caring about all these things, and you know it's a web where all of these are linked, and where if you work on one bit of injustice, it trickles down and another bit of injustice is linked. But my argument in my book is that food poverty is the link that holds all of these together. You know, by addressing the root causes of food poverty, we expose those injustices. We expose those marginalized people. We expose the fault lines that the church has, in some parts, created. The injustices that run through society that exacerbate food poverty. And you know, it seems insurmountable. These injustices are so interlinked. There's always been hungry people. It's so deeply entrenched. It feels impossible. But it's a basic human need, and it's at the center of our lives. And physical food for a physical body is necessary in a physical world. It's really that simple. And we need to think about it. And I think no one does enough, myself included. I definitely don't do enough. And like I said, I think if you care about all these other injustices, this is something we should be working on inherently, because something else that directly links with this, and as I said, I work in climate change research, is nutrition. You know, a lot of people have access to really rubbish food. And if it's not nutritionally sound, it's not just. That's not just. Having enough isn't good enough. You need to have good food. And with climate change, there is the opportunity to change the way we grow things, to change the way food is distributed, to change our consumption patterns, and ensure that there is enough nutritional food for everyone. And so it's linked with every issue, but it requires disruption. It requires a new framework. One of the things I talk about in the chapter is autonomy. We don't love autonomy in this country. You know, we give the poor people benefits, but we decide how they can spend them. And internationally, in global humanitarian work, we give the people food, but they don't get to choose what they're eating. And Jesus didn't want that. He's made us all these unique, autonomous human beings. God bestows free will upon us so that we can have that. And I think it is directly in contrast to the gospel message to decide what the poor should have. We need to listen. We need to be alongside them. We need to be with them so that they can choose. We need to ensure that they have choice. But the truth is that those of us with power and money, we're willing to give to the poor, but we want to also maintain the status quo because it benefits us. You know, in this room, I would say almost every single one of us, and I can see 2 people here, there might be more, and I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but we all benefit from white supremacy, bar 2 people, which means we all are more likely to get good jobs, which means we all are more likely to have enough money to pay for food, which means we're all more likely to have social networks which we can depend on If we get into a short-term state of like, oh, I'm just trying to make ends meet, can you help me out till the end of the month so I can afford to feed the kids? And we need to disrupt that, and we need to be uncomfortable doing that. It needs to cause us discomfort, because I do it myself. You know, I give to the poor and I don't give them enough that it makes me uncomfortable, because I like my life. I like my one-bedroom flat with my partner, Catherine, in Battersea. I like my bicycle. I like going for cycles. I like my holidays. I like coming up to Iona. And you are all incredible. You know, I've learned so much about the community these last few days, and this idea of accounting. Oh, what a gift that is, that you all have to be held accountable to people that love you. That's amazing. But is it enough, I guess, is my question. And is it enough to be doing it individually, is my question. And we need to help people thrive. And so you've all got some post-it notes and pens. Does anyone not have a post-it note and a pen? Oh, I think there's some people. Oh, okay. Everyone in the group should have someone with post-it notes and pens. Everyone needs a few post-it notes and pens. So once you've all got some post-it notes and some pens, for those of you who have not been blessed to read my chapter yet, and believe me, it is a blessing, you should all go buy the book. It's available in the community bookshop just up there. The chapter is, I divide my argument into 3 sections. And so I'm going to ask you all to just quietly reflect on those 3 sections now. So the first section is that our God is compassionate. And so I want you all to just write down one way in your daily life that you're going to name the drivers of short-term hunger and the inequalities that create long-term hunger. And write down one way that the Iona community can name the drivers of short-term hunger and the inequalities that create long-term hunger, because our compassionate God wants to know. And in order to create change around us, we need to know. So I'm just going to give you all 2 minutes. You'll have a chance to chat in a bit. So if this could just be a little bit of a more reflective moment, you could draw a picture, you could write a poem, but just name in your daily life one way how you're going to do that. To write down is to do with God who is just. Now in the book, you heard Victoria talk earlier. There are people out there that really don't like our book. And the line I wrote that they, food poverty, that there's not really much I've written that anyone can really take cause with, because we all agree it's bad. But he had to be angry at everyone that wrote in the book. So the line he took issue with in my book is that I wrote, our God is just, but our God is not a judge. And that's my own personal belief. I believe it's called a Universalist Theology. Some people might not, and that is also beautiful and wonderful, but I do. And I do believe our God is just, and I do believe our God is not a judge. And I think that means we are all condemned to life of abundance. We're all condemned to life of thriving. And in order to change that, we need to be able to criticize it. We've named what's wrong. We now need to say why it's wrong, how it's wrong. So just want to give you all a moment again to write down one day in your daily life that you're going to criticize the drivers of short-term hunger and the inequalities that create longer-term food poverty, and one way that Iona community could criticize these drivers and inequalities. See, a few people are still writing. I'm just going to give it a little bit until I go on to the next piece. So the third attribute I gave to God in my chapter is the one that I thought people would take cause with, but seems to have slipped under the net. And of course, it's brilliant. We've named it. It's brilliant. We've criticized it. But now we need to act. And our God is materialistic. He cares, she cares, they care that we have enough. They care about our material well-being. They care that we share in creation. And so now I want you to all just take a moment. We will have about 15 minutes to chat. So I promise you there's time to chat coming. But one way in your daily life, you're going to fight these drivers of short-term hunger and the inequalities that create long-term food poverty. And one way that Iona community could fight this. So I really encourage you to carry these post-it notes with you over the next week, and to let them seep into what you're doing, what you're saying, your conversation. I really encourage you to think about this in all the other sessions and think about how this links, and yeah, to just carry it with you. I mean, you know, carry it with you for the rest of your life and change the world. That would be wonderful. But yeah, I just want to open up now for reflections on whether Iona's woke. I want to open up on reflections of what you want to change, any questions you might have. But first, I want to really thank you for listening, and thank you for, I've seen everyone writing, and that's wonderful. It's such a gift, and I've wanted to come to Iona for a long time, a really long time. The liturgy and the poems of Iona are so central to my faith, and they have got me through some really difficult times in my life. And so to be invited here is, my mind can't comprehend it. I think it's going to take me about 2 years to process that I've been invited. So I just want to thank you all, and I want to thank God for that. And I want to pray that this conversation is good and it is justice driven, and that it continues for the rest of the week and into the action for our rest of our lives. So thank you. Victoria will have the roaming mic, and you can ask Victoria questions too.
Okay, Alison Jackson from the Bristol Family Group. I have to say that I totally agree with you, Anna, that your chapter is the best in the book. It's absolutely, absolutely amazing.
Wrote it myself.
And I'd just like to give a push for the Iona community's involvement in food poverty in the UK. There's an organization, I don't know if you've come across it, called Church Action on Poverty. Okay, well, I am a member and I was chair of trustees for several years. And the current chair of trustees is also a member of the community. So I hope a lot of these post-it stickers say support Church Action on Poverty, because that organization goes for the drivers of hunger and the inequalities. It doesn't so much fund individual projects, although it's supporting food pantries, but it doesn't fund the individual projects. It's one that is really going for the drivers, and so it deserves the kind of support that Anna wants us to give.
And Church Action on Poverty have just hired an amazing position that I was going to apply for and then missed the deadline. And it's the name of the position. They've employed someone to speak truth to power. That is the name of what they're going to be doing. So watch this space, listen and get involved.
Rosie Cole's Yorkshire 3 Family Group. I wonder, can you tell us what you think the Iona community might do about this?
I've got a lot of feelings about this. I hope no one would ask it. So I came here thinking, what do this lot do? What, like, they produce amazing poems. They've written, John Bell, he's written a whole load of songs. Their liturgy is awesome, but like, what do they do? And then I've come here, and since Friday, I've met about 225 incredible people who all do a heck of a lot of amazing things. But I'm still not clear on what the Iona community does. And I think on the one hand, it's enabling all of you in your individual life to do awesome stuff. And that can't change. That is amazing. And that is beautiful. And that is what is making me think, should I be investing and engaging in this community to give me that fire, to give me that rest? It seems to be a place of fire and a place of rest for a lot of you. And I love that. And I love what you're all doing. But beyond that, I don't know. I don't know what it's doing. I didn't know. I was on an amazing course with Victoria, which is when she said, I've got to hand a book in 3 weeks. Can you write a chapter about food poverty? And I was like, yeah, go on. And I didn't realize Iona, it's called The Journey of Hope, and Iona is a trustee. Is that right, Ruth? A partner in that journey. And I did it for 7 months, and I didn't realize. And I think you're not boastful. And Victoria told me a story last night about your founder, who I believe is called Andrew MacLeod. George. makes a good story. About George MacLeod, and he wrote down his life. He cut out every press clipping ever of Iona. And he went to the National Library of Scotland and he went, "You guys are going to want this. This is important." That's boasting. Oh yeah, I love that. And I mean, Iona is a whisper, and I get that, but you shouldn't be afraid to shout. And I wonder if Iona needs to find those things it's happy to shout about. And there are truths, I as part of the community of St. Anselm, which is an ecumenical community as well, I understand it's difficult to agree on what to shout about. But there are some fundamental things we can shout about, such as people shouldn't be hungry. And I think it's about distilling what you're willing to shout about. And there's power in this room and there's power in this collective. And it's about you as individuals looking for people who you can give your power to. As I said, we all benefit from white supremacy. So see who you can amplify, see who you can put in touch with, who you can put in touch with as an individual. Step back when you need to step back and give the microphone, fund the microphone, give the microphone, build the microphone, and then hand it to someone who needs it. And then as a community, I just think there needs to be something. I don't know what it is. None of us do, but God knows and God understands it, and it'll happen.
Hi, I'm Colin from the West Midlands family group. I've got 3 post-it notes, but I'm amazingly written something very similar on each of them. And for me personally, to name it, to criticize it, to fight it will be my political campaigning. And I will continue to do that with my fellow Labour Party members in and around Lichfield and across the country. And we will eventually transform the world and make it better for everyone. The second thing I put for the community, it reflects pretty much what Anna's just said in a way. I think we need to be agreeing a joint statement with Church Action on Poverty and with Christians Against Poverty and putting that out in the public domain. That would be naming it and criticizing it. And the third one is slightly different. We need to be politically campaigning. And I don't mean necessarily party political. We need to be nationally making it clear that we're not happy with the way things are and putting open letters to government and to ministers and also locally through our family groups, writing to the local MP. In our case, it won't make a blind bit of difference because we've got the most dreadful MP in the entire country. But no, we have, but we beat everyone. We've got Michael Fabricant, God help us. So, but that won't stop us doing something. So that for me would be how we act individually and corporately.
I think as well, just a reflection that I've just had that I quickly want to share. I'm taking up a lot of airtime and I'm very sorry, but Iona, like I said, your liturgy and your poems, guys, oh my days. People around the world use these things and they don't know what Iona is. And I think that's somewhere you can be doing it. In your liturgy, you're so good at naming it and you're so good at gently and lovingly criticizing it. And so maybe it's about, releasing liturgy regularly on International World Poverty Day. You release a liturgy for it and share it with networks. On whatever day you release, this sort of thing. Look at what you're good at already, and that is a real thing Iona has.
Thank you. John Harvey from the Glasgow Southeast Family Group. Following on what Colin has been saying, for a long time the community was very concerned that members should get involved in party politics, because at the end of the day, it's political decisions that decide how how money is distributed, and it's money that controls the whole food issue. So I'm wondering whether that's something that the community is still committed to, and B, I'm wondering whether you think that young people feel that party politics is still relevant today.
You're asking the wrong person there, John, because I shouted at all my friends that didn't even bother to vote against Brexit. Yeah, simple answer is yes. Young people want to be politically involved, but they're tired, they're jaded, and they're ignored. So if you found a way to give them a voice, wow.
Thank you, Liz Dowler, Thames Valley. Lots to say about what Anna's been talking about, which is fantastic. But I want to follow up with the points that are being made, because while I've spent a lot of my life trying to shift political practice, to change regulation, to work in policy, what seems to me in Britain and a number of the countries represented here, maybe not all, over the last 5 or maybe more years, is that the public narrative is what's where the challenge lies. I'm not very good at addressing that public narrative. I asked people I was sitting with recently how many of us tweeted, and the answer was quite shameful from my point of view, who doesn't tweet, that none of us did. And there are no doubt other ways in getting the message out. I don't even write very much to my local paper, which is the Oxford Times, or that's one of them. You might think it doesn't matter, but sometimes things in a local paper get into a national paper. But I think actually we're not shouting enough, it's a good phrase, to change the way people think. Well, my answers to your questions were the gig economy, people not being valued, that it's okay for people to have rubbish jobs because they don't matter. And that social security is not that, it's welfare to those who are too lazy to work. Those narratives, which are very widespread in different countries, various versions, need very profound challenging. And it's harder now to change that thinking than it was even 5 or 10 years ago when I was still working and tried to, being paid for what I did, and trying to shift that narrative. So I feel a bit despondent about how hard it is to get that voice out, because the politicians, as far as I can see, some of them, the Prime Minister at the moment, in this country, by a rather weird democratic deficit system, seem to be listening to what media barons are saying, what power in the press is driving, and not what people want. And somehow I think we have to be able to say, not in my name, both on poverty and on all the other issues that we're talking about this week.
Unfortunately, we have an online question, then we have to bring it to a close. I'm really sorry. But anyone who's going to be on the Stafford trip, you can chat to me more about this. I'd love that this afternoon, in between me throwing up over the side of the edge of the boat. That would be great. And yeah, I'd love to continue this conversation with all of you. So do chat amongst yourselves and chat to me. But we've got an online question.
So there's a comment and question from Helen Weavers in Australia. And Helen is raising a comment saying the session is so UK centered, whereas the Iona community is striving to be a global community, and poses the question, how much does it apply to the rest of us? And that is for the people on Zoom as much as the people in the room.
Totally, it applies completely. The chapter talks about the global context. I've talked about the UK context in this room just because it's where we are. And as far as I'm aware, the majority of the people in this room live in that context. But 100% it applies globally. Every single thing that has been said applies globally. And will do for a long time. We've got a lot of work to do. So go and eat lunch and get ready to do some work, guys.
So Victoria and Anna, thank you. You have, I asked you to share your stories and give us bold questions. And you've done that remarkably well and succinctly and graciously. I hope we'll do justice to your stories and to your questions. This has set the tone for how the week is going to go. Thank you so much. I should just say, and it's really interesting, I saw Wendy taking copious notes with all the remarkable, and tweeting with all the remarkable reflections, Anna, particularly at the end here. We were one of the 56 signatories to Gordon Brown's statement yesterday. the work we have to do is to amplify that voice. All of us. So we definitely have a job to do in the Glasgow office, but very few of us are there. But if you can be on Twitter, on Facebook, and put that message out there, that would really help. It's not the only thing we can do, but you know, it is interesting, isn't it? We do punch above our weight, but we don't think we know that. So thank you. Or we could punch above our weight, perhaps. Find a different metaphor, Ruth. For now, thank you so much. Lunch and then Staffa for Anna and others. Thank you so much.